Hi, glad to see you on my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It's important to me. Have a good view. The Viet Minh's final attempt to turn the tide of the war in Cochinchina began in early October. It coincided with the defeat of French troops on Colonial Road No. 4 at Tonkin. Strikes in the long-suffering Cha Vinh and Tiao Doc area, and then north of Saigon in Military Zone D, resulted in occasional heavy skirmishes with heavy casualties for the sides. The fall attacks lacked the former focus and coordination of forces and looked more like guerrilla warfare than a strategic offensive. This was something the French could handle. By November, Viet Minh units had only to withdraw from the battle, minimizing casualties. In Saigon, which had recently been on the verge of a revolutionary situation, after the departure of Nguyen Phan Long in May, draconian measures were taken against the communist underground. By the end of the year, the secret police had pacified the capital of the South. The next attempt to seize it was made by the communists only 18 years later. The first and last Viet Minh offensive in Cochinchina ended in nothing, and the French counteroffensive of the 1950-1951 dry season inflicted heavy losses on formations and damage to base areas. The hard-won regiments of the main force had to be disbanded. France won a victory, unnoticed by anyone against the backdrop of the disaster in the north, and a few years later turned out to be unnecessary for her own. General Binh was declared responsible for the failure and was called on the carpet to his superiors. According to some assumptions, even counting on the fact that he would not reach his destination. Binh walked through the wild jungle with a small unit, suffering from tropical diseases and lack of food, and it is possible that his fate on this journey was sealed without the fateful encounter with Cambodian chasseurs on September 29, 1951. In the fall of 1950, Fighter Group 26 had two big news. First, the one-year tour of duty, which was nearing completion, was extended by 6 months. Second, the group was to lose its King Cobras. The French had no particular complaints about the flight and combat performance of the P-63. The problem was the lack of spare parts and ammunition. All this had to be purchased from the Americans. They had run out of spare parts, and for some reason negotiations on the supply of 37mm shells for the guns were not progressing. The French requested 1.8 million shells, but in 1950 they delivered 79,000, that is, an average of 1,300 for each of the 60 King Cobras in Indochina, or 3 or 4 shells per plane per day. In practice, a little more because not every plane flew every day. The already mentioned Roger Perotti testified that pilots were not allowed to use the 37mm cannon, although he may have been referring to some time constraints. The result of such supply problems was the withdrawal of the P-63 from service with the Far East Air Force in 1951. The French wanted to replace the Kings with Mustangs or even Sabres. In the conditions of the Korean War, they received neither of them. It is said that the choice in favor of deck planes Grumman was made in the spring of 1950 at a meeting of the French command with American representatives, and the most important argument was good takeoff and landing characteristics. So the main combat aircraft of the French Air Force in Indochina was destined to become a fighter-bomber Grumman F-8F Bearcat, and before its delivery, as a temporary measure, took F-6F Hellcat. However, there is a slightly different version that the French had the Hellcat last on their wish list, and agreed to it rather because they had little choice at the time. In late October 1950, the aircraft carrier Dixmude delivered 4 dozen F-6F-5s to Saigon, the first delivery of American weapons for the war in Indochina. It was planned to distribute them equally between the two fighter groups, Normandy Neyman and 1 or 6 Corsica. But because of the accident of one plane, Normandy got 19 machines, to compensate for the loss of which was nothing. Already on December 12th, Lieutenant Perfettini performed the first combat flight on Hellcat in the area of Longmy, and by the end of the year, in the group Duck 26 remained only 3 P-63. At the end of the King Cobra's full operational life, tragedy befell the group. On November 2nd, Lieutenant Robert Bastide began having problems with the cooling system while flying with Lieutenant Moreau. He attempted an emergency landing on a soccer field, during which aircraft 44-4076 collided with an embankment, taking the pilot's life. During this period, the Normandy was increasingly taken from Cochinchina to the north, thanks to which it made its mark in key battles of the war. After the defeat of the expeditionary force at Cao Bang in mid-October, the detachment with Captain de Montplanet temporarily arrived at Hanoi's Zialam airfield. The first strikes were made on the French depots abandoned in the hurried evacuation of Longchamp. Once again, Normans were here before the new year, now in Batmai and on new F-6Fs. In January 1951, they, along with other air groups, bombed the advancing regiments at Vinh Hien, dashing the Viet Minh's hopes of a quick victory in the war. In February, another detachment was stationed at Tehran, Da Nang, where it stayed until the end of the Viet Minh mission. In March, another detachment was once again sent to Cambodia for a few days. Normandy fought in all regions of French Indochina, except Laos. The first loss of a Hellcat proved to be a historic moment for the group. On January 19, 1951, a pair of planes were returning from a combat sortie over the Kamishowaya Plain when Lieutenant Maurice Jackson's engine stalled. One source claims it was hit by ground fire, but this fact does not appear in the very detailed descriptions of the incident. Flight number 78083 made a hard landing. Upon waking up, Jackson found himself in the middle of a huge swamp, swarming with mosquitoes and Viet Minh, far from French positions. Neither the lead pair nor the other planes that flew out to search for him spotted the pilot in the water near the wreckage. He was presumed dead, and pro-French Hoaxau guerrillas were sent to the crash site in hopes of finding the body. Jackson's survival was probably aided by his knowledge of the inhospitable plain, where he had been with the infantry as an air gunner. He hid in swampy mud from Viet Minh groups searching for him, and managed to attract the attention of a scout plane with a signal mirror the next morning. After spending 16 hours behind enemy lines, Jackson was picked up by a Hiller 360 helicopter, pilot Sergeant Louis Raymond Fumas, and taken to Tan Chon Yat, where he was met by the commander of the French Far Eastern Air Force, General André Artemon. Thus took place the first evacuation of an accidented pilot by helicopter in the history of the Indochina Wars. Hellcat Jackson was the first of 3 lost by the Tui-6 fighter group in more than 4 months of operation. On March 4th, flight number 79407 crashed near Zongriang, almost on the Kamau Peninsula, due to an engine fire. Under fire cover of F-6Fs and B-26s, Lieutenant Pierre Moreau was rescued by the same Sergeant Fuma's helicopter 3 hours later. On March 9th, the Parody Pishoff pair was on a combat mission from Tehran. South of Quang Ngai, the wingman, number 79614, again had an engine fire. Lieutenant André Pishoff went down in the South China Sea and swam until he accidentally ran into the USS Phnom Penh, American submarine hunter type PC-461, which was coming to his rescue but had the wrong coordinates. The losses were irreparable. There were no reserve F-6Fs, but this was not required. The Indochina service of Normandy Niemen was coming to an end. During April 1951, the group flew 210 sorties, actively destroying Viet Minh sea transport and supporting operations in the Shadek and Hatien area. The last 6 sorties were on April 30th. The personnel departed for home in early May, leaving 16 surviving Hellcats to the Tu-9 Auvergne fighter group. For a year and a half in this war, Normandy Niemen made 4977 sorties with 6,900 hours of flight time. According to French researcher Philippe Gras, it lost 2 personnel, but all available sources mention and describe only 1 death, that of Lieutenant Bastide, November 2, 1950. Irrecoverable losses of aircraft amounted to at least 5, at least 2 P-63s, exactly 3 F-6Fs, and hardly more than a dozen machines. 1 King Cobra was reliably lost to anti-aircraft fire on May 5, 1950, and there may have been other incidents. One source claims that a Hellcat was shot down on January 19, 1951, and the fate of a King Cobra shot down on October 22, 1950, is also unknown. Thus ended another Normandy War, and it did not lose its war in Cochinchina. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Forget to put a like and subscribe to the channel. It's important to me. See you soon.